I'm calling the police right now." I heard her scream it from across the street, phone glued to her ear, finger pointed like a judge handing down a sentence, and I just smiled because I was loading another box into a truck, and the whole thing felt deliciously absurd. Imagine getting threatened by your neighbor for packing up your own life. I know, right? Stay with me. It gets better. 3 months earlier, I'd rolled into Maple Ridge Drive with a rented moving truck, a military pension, and the kind of naive hope that makes you buy a house on a quiet, dead-end street. I'm Xavier Finley, former logistics officer used to moving people and equipment across continents, and the plan was simple. Settle down, plant a few tomatoes, and drink my morning coffee without being interrogated about rose colors. Within an hour, the HOA's self-appointed sovereign arrived. Constance Blackwell, 58, retired bank manager, hair sculpted, like it had an appointment with a hurricane, thrust a handbook at me that looked like it had been drafted by a committee of overly meticulous robots. "Welcome to Maple Ridge," she said, smile like a winter morning. "I'm the HOA president. Here are our expectations." Expectations turned out to be rules down to the quarter-inch mailbox, shades, approved paint numbers, grass varieties with names that sounded like luxury soaps, and fines for things you wouldn't believe. Trouble started when movers clipped a sprinkler head, $12 worth of damage, and suddenly I was the enemy. Constance appeared like a missile, photographing the broken sprinkler from every angle, delivering a $500 fine for destruction of HOA assets. I fixed the sprinkler that afternoon, bought better fittings, landscaped around it, and still a fine. That night I read bylaws until 2 a.m., tasted bitter coffee and the thin metallic tang of something I'd come to recognize bullshit. Turns out she'd spent 8 years amending the rules, tightening control, turning a voluntary association into a personal empire. I learned to read covenants like intelligence briefings. What matters is the original charter. The 1974 papers said membership was voluntary. The grass purity clause passed with fewer votes than required, buried in meeting minutes. Illegal, essentially. But the deeper wrinkle, the thing that turned irritation into fury, was how much money was moving around. Payments to a turf testing lab, consulting fees to companies tied to her family. Suddenly fines looked less like community upkeep and more like a racket. Then Dorothy knocked on my door with cookies and a secret smile. 74 Widow next door, a walking repository of neighborhood grudges. "Don't let her intimidate you," she said. "Some of us have been waiting for someone to push back." That's when this stopped being about my mailbox shade and started being about justice. I began documenting everything. I walked Maple Ridge Drive with a camera, photos of every lawn, every driveway, every vehicle. Dorothy's lawn, 40% clover, and she'd been cultivating it for decades. Constance's own yard, a deliberate clover border, hypocrisy delicious and obvious. I built a file, 17 violations across 11 houses, and put together a report that made my coffee taste sweeter by the hour. She escalated. Complaints to the city about commercial activity at my house despite my truck being a personal vehicle with old work stickers. Contractors turned up to inspect a common area behind my house and tore down fence posts, severed sprinkler lines, all while Constance supervised from her driveway like a director of small-town chaos. Unbeknownst to her, I'd installed a security system 2 weeks earlier. Everything was recorded, video, audio, her voice, her instructions, the crash of wood on concrete. She was giving me evidence. The big twist came when I dug into property records, mortgage delinquencies, payments that traced back to people with her last name, foreclosures lining up with buyers connected to a property firm tied to her brother-in-law. The pattern was textbook manufactured distress, forced sales below market, flip the houses for profit. Families weren't just inconvenienced, they were being ruined. So I stopped being a target and started being a strategist. Military logistics has a soft spot for planning. I made calls. I spoke to a parking enforcement officer who'd been on the receiving end of Constance's weekly complaints. I showed him the photos. He laughed not at me, but at the absurdity of her selective enforcement. Then I spoke to a title company for old plats, to county clerks for meeting minutes, to the bank that held mortgages. Every document was a breadcrumb, and I followed them. I bought a foreclosed house on our street, the Martinez place, and standing in that empty kitchen, I felt the weight of what had been taken from them. Maria Martinez had packed her kids' lunchboxes there for years. She'd been driven out by harassment that escalated to false reports. That hit harder than any violation notice. It was no longer a game. This was revenge with teeth. I didn't want revenge for revenge's sake. I wanted repair. But first strategy: acquire properties, control the board, stop the scam. Sound crazy? It was. But I had a plan. Operation Neighborhood Justice, as we came to call it, between graveside coffees. I recruited allies. Dorothy's son, Michael, contractor, righteous, and has credit lines, a battalion of neighbors tired of being terrorized, and an attorney who looked at my spreadsheet and stopped calling me crazy only when the numbers checked out. We moved fast, quietly. Shell companies separate closings, layers of legal paperwork that would make a bureaucrat weep. Secrecy was everything. Constance's patterns gave us windows. She visited her sister in another state regularly. That's when we closed. She packed fines into emergency meeting agendas. We coordinated simultaneous purchases. The math was stark: by almost the whole street by her mortgage debt, and the tyrant had nowhere to hide. She freaked out in classic cornered animal style. False emergency calls, fake boundary surveys dropped on our porches, contractors brought in to repair imaginary encroachments. Every escalation left a paper trail. One time she tried to get the gas company to dig up my yard. The supervisor sniffed it out within 20 minutes and informed her that false emergency reports are criminal. She was handing me felony-level evidence while thinking she was winning. I could almost hear Dorothy's chuckle through the window. Closing day felt surreal. 11 houses bought through different entities, the county records filled in an hour. I owned the street in every meaningful legal way except for one house, hers. I'd also purchased the mortgage on that one. At the HOA annual meeting, under fluorescent lights that make everybody look guilty, I walked up and laid down deeds, like a magician revealing the final card trick. Ladies and gentlemen, I said I own every house on Maple Ridge Drive except one. You should have seen the gasps. Constance went from queen to paper doll in 60 seconds. The sheriff's deputy examined the deeds, the bank confirmed the mortgage purchase, and the room turned into a feed of murmurs and scribbling reporters. Her empire collapsed like a bad souffle. She fled boxes, rented truck, a forwarding address out of state, but wire fraud and conspiracy don't respect moving vans. Investigations followed. The bank records, the shell purchasers, the fake surveys. There was enough for restitution, criminal charges, and a long list of people who needed apologies and compensation. We redistributed misappropriated funds back to families, lowered HOA dues, and turned fines into community workdays. What I kept and what I gave back mattered. A few houses became rentals for young families at affordable rates. One became a neighborhood workshop, another a meeting space. We launched a small scholarship to help folks fight HOA abuse. The block parties came back. Mrs. Patterson planted a memorial garden where the fake common area used to be. Birds nested, kids played, and the scent of coffee on my porch tasted like something resembling peace. Here's the part I didn't see coming, the human part. Constance pleaded guilty to fraud. She got probation and restitution. She's barred from HOA boards, required to do community service. That's the legal end. The sweeter part is ordinary neighbors talking over fences, helping each other with actual problems instead of fining each other into submission. Justice was not loud. It was steady, tedious, document-driven, and it was effective. If there's a lesson, and I'm not here to sermonize, it's this: small tyranny thrives in silence and in checks unchallenged. People with power and no oversight will invent rules to benefit themselves. But systems can be exposed if you're willing to do the boring work. Read the records, follow the money, document everything, and build allies. Sometimes the best way to beat a bully is to outplan them. Plan. And there's another truth I keep thinking about late at night. Revenge tastes better when you're building something better, not just tearing someone down. We rebuilt houses, funded kids' scholarships, created resources for neighbors. That felt like the real victory. So, quick question for you. How far would you go when someone weaponizes small-town rules against decent people? Have you faced an HOA or neighborhood bully like this, or watched a friend pushed out by petty tyranny? Tell me your worst HOA nightmare below. And if you've ever fought back, how did it end? I read everyone. Share your story, and if you've got a wild, don't mess with a retired logistics officer anecdote, I'm all ears.